The wind that morning carried dust and disappointment in equal measure. It slipped through the broken shutters of the county orphan house and whispered along the narrow iron beds where children lay awake long before sunrise. They all knew what day it was, Adoption Day. In the far corner of the girls' dormitory, a small figure sat upright on her cot, hands clasped so tightly together her knuckles had gone white. Her name was Eliza May Harper, though most people simply called her Liza. She was 10 years old, thin as a willow switch, with chestnut hair that refused to stay braided and gray, blue eyes that seemed too large for her narrow face. "Nobody will pick me," she murmured to herself, not for the first time. She had been at the orphan house since she was 6. Long enough to see babies carried away wrapped in bright quilts. Long enough to see toddlers toddle off holding new mothers' fingers. Long enough to see girls her own age chosen for their bright smiles, or golden curls, or quiet manners. Long enough to know how it went. Families walked down the line, they asked questions, they pinched cheeks. They whispered to the matron, and then they chose. They never chose her, not after the first year. The first year, she had stood tall, hopeful. She had told people she could read. She could sew crooked but strong stitches. She could milk a cow without being kicked. She could carry water without spilling much. After the second year, she stopped listing her talents. After the third, she stopped meeting their eyes. That morning, she smoothed down her faded blue dress. It had been washed so many times the fabric felt like thin paper. She braided her hair twice, then once again, fingers trembling. From the other beds came whispers. "Mrs. Wilkins is coming again. She wants a little one. I heard a banker from town is coming. I heard someone from the north is looking for a farm boy." Liza swallowed. No one ever came looking for a 10-year-old girl who was too quiet and not pretty enough to turn heads. The matron clapped her hands sharply. "Line up, children." Boots thudded across wooden floors. Small shoes scuffed nervously. Liza took her place near the end of the row. She preferred the end. That way, when families lost interest halfway through, she would not have to watch their faces change as they approached her. The doors opened. Sunlight flooded the narrow hall, and with it came the townsfolk. They smelled of soap and leather and possibility. One by one, they walked past the children. A couple chose a little boy with freckles and a missing tooth. A woman in green chose twin girls who held hands. A rancher selected a sturdy 12-year-old boy who looked strong enough to swing a hammer by sunset. Each time someone was chosen, the line shortened. Each time, Liza felt both relief and dread. Relief it wasn't her being examined. Dread that it would never be her at all. By noon, only 3 children remained. A sickly toddler who coughed into his sleeve. A red-haired girl who cried whenever anyone looked at her, and Liza. The matron's smile had grown thin and forced. "Plenty of good children left," she said brightly. The last couple hesitated in front of Liza. "How old?" the woman asked. 10, the matron replied. The man frowned. "That's near grown. She can work." The matron offered quickly. "She's quiet, obedient." The woman studied Liza's face. Liza stared at the floorboards. "She looks sad." The woman said softly. The man shook his head. "We need someone cheerful for the little ones." They moved on. The door shut. Silence fell like a blanket. The matron exhaled sharply. "All right, back to chores." The toddler was taken to the infirmary. The red-haired girl was sent to the kitchen. Liza stood frozen for a moment before turning toward the laundry room. Her chest felt hollow, as if something inside had finally cracked. "Nobody picked me, again." She bent over the wash basin, scrubbing shirts with more force than necessary. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she wiped them away quickly. Crying didn't change anything. Outside, Hooves sounded in the yard. Lisa ignored it at first. Sometimes deliveries came late. Sometimes someone forgot paperwork. The matron's voice floated in from the hall, sharper than before. "We're closed for the day." A deep, quiet voice answered, "I rode 3 hours. I'll wait." There was something about that voice. Steady, low, not demanding. Lisa slowed her scrubbing. A few moments later, the matron appeared in the doorway of the laundry room. "You," she said. Lisa stiffened. "Wash your face. There's someone else." Hope was dangerous. It rose too fast and burned too bright. She wiped her cheeks with the hem of her dress and followed the matron to the front hall. He stood near the doorway, hat in hand. He was tall, broad, shouldered, sun-browned. His dark hair brushed the collar of his worn coat. A faint scar traced along his jawline. His boots were dusty from hard travel. He did not smile. He simply looked at her, not over her head. Not past her, at her. The matron cleared her throat. "This is Eliza. She's 10. He nodded once. His eyes were a soft, unexpected brown. "What can you do?" he asked. The question caught in her throat. She almost said, "Nothing special." Instead, she whispered, "I can read, and so some, and I'm good with animals." He tilted his head slightly. "You afraid of horses?" She shook her head. "Hard winters." She hesitated. "I don't like them, but I'm not afraid." A faint shadow of approval crossed his face. The matron stepped closer. "Mr. Carter runs a cattle ranch west of here. He's never taken a child before." Lisa's heart thudded painfully. Mr. Carter studied her for a long moment. She braced herself for the usual look. The measuring, the doubt, the dismissal. Instead, he said quietly, "Why haven't you been chosen before?" The matron stiffened. Lisa swallowed. Honesty slipped out before fear could stop it. "I suppose I'm not what folks are looking for." "And what's that? Smaller or happier?" Silence stretched. Then something changed in his expression. Not pity, understanding. He stepped forward. The matron began, "If you'd like to look at the other." He raised a hand gently. "That one," he said. The words hung in the air. Lisa blinked. "Mine." Her breath left her in a trembling rush. The matron sputtered slightly. "You haven't asked about her health, or references, or—" "I've seen enough," he replied. He crouched down so they were eye level. "Lisa," he said carefully, as if testing the name, "you want to come see the ranch." It was not a command. It was not a promise. It was a choice. Nobody had ever offered her one before. Her voice shook. "Yes, sir." He nodded once. "Then pack what's yours." She owned very little: a spare dress, a small book with loose pages, a wooden comb. As she tied them into a cloth bundle, her hands trembled so badly she had to redo the knot twice. The matron watched silently as Mr. Carter signed the papers. When it was done, he held the door open. Sunlight spilled across the floor. Lisa paused at the threshold. The orphan house had been her whole world for 4 years. "No one picked me." Until now. She stepped outside. The air felt different, wider. His horse stood tethered nearby, a sturdy bay mare with kind eyes. "She's gentle," he said. "Name's Clover." He lifted Lisa easily into the saddle before climbing up behind her. His arm rested steady and protective around her as he took the reins. They rode west. For a long time, neither spoke. The town shrank behind them. Fields stretched wide and gold. The sky seemed endless. "You don't talk much," she said finally, surprised at her own boldness. "Not unless there's something worth saying." She nodded. After a pause, he added, "You can talk as much as you like." She almost smiled. As the sun dipped low, a small ranch house came into view. Smoke curled from the chimney. A red barn stood nearby. Fences traced the land like careful lines. "This is it," he said. It wasn't grand. It wasn't fancy. But it felt solid. He lifted her down gently. A gray-haired woman stepped out onto the porch. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Lisa. "Well," she said, "you finally did it." He gave a small shrug. "This is Lisa." The woman's face softened instantly. "I'm Martha. I keep this stubborn man fed." Lisa managed a shy nod. Martha stepped forward and cupped Lisa's cheek briefly. "You must be tired." The simple kindness nearly undid her. Inside, the house smelled of stew and wood smoke. A small bedroom had been prepared, fresh quilts, a wash basin, a window that looked out over the pasture. "For me," Lisa whispered. "Mr." Carter leaned against the doorframe. "Reckon so." That night, lying in a real bed that did not creak with a dozen other children shifting nearby, Lisa stared at the ceiling. Nobody picked me until a quiet cowboy raised his hand. Tears slipped into her hair, not of sorrow, of something new, belonging. The days that followed were not easy. Ranch life demanded early mornings and strong hands. Lisa learned to gather eggs without cracking them, to brush Clover's coat until it shone, to stack firewood without splinters. She made mistakes. She dropped a milk pail once and cried in frustration. Mr. Carter did not yell. He simply handed her a cloth and said, "Try again." She burned biscuits one morning. Martha laughed. Char builds character. Slowly, something inside Lisa began to change. She stood straighter. She spoke a little louder. She laughed once. An unexpected, bright sound that startled even herself. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed gold across the fields, she asked quietly, "Why me, Mr.?" Carter rested his elbows on his knees. "When I was about your age," he said slowly, "my pa died. Folks helped, but no one stayed. I learned what it feels like to be overlooked." She listened carefully. "You weren't overlooked," he continued. "They just didn't know what they were seeing." Her throat tightened. He glanced at her. "I did." The words settled deep in her chest, warm and steady. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed the fields and howled against the windows. Supplies ran low. A storm tore part of the barn roof loose. Fear crept in, cold and sharp. But Lisa did not tremble like she once had. She hauled water. She fed chickens. She stitched torn canvas with determined fingers. One night, as wind roared outside, Mr. Carter struggled to secure a shutter. Without being asked, Lisa grabbed a lantern and held it high, steady despite the gusts. He glanced at her through swirling snow. "Good girl," he said simply. The words meant more than applause. When spring finally thawed the earth, green shoots pushed through soil that had seemed dead. So did Lisa. Neighbors began to notice. "That's Carter's girl." They'd say in town, "Not the orphan. Not the leftover. Carter's girl." One afternoon, nearly a year after she had stood at the end of that line, they rode into town together. Children gathered near the general store. A new adoption day. Lisa froze as she saw the line of small faces. The same fear, the same hope. One little girl near the end looked especially familiar, thin, quiet, eyes lowered. Lisa dismounted slowly. She walked over and knelt in front of her. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Clara," the girl whispered. "You afraid?" A tiny nod. Lisa smiled softly. "Sometimes," she said, "the right person just needs a little time to arrive." Behind her, Mr. Carter stood watching, quiet, steady, present, and when a hesitant couple approached Clara, Lisa squeezed her hand once before stepping back. As she returned to Mr. Carter's side, he rested a warm hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" he asked. She looked up at him, no longer trembling. "Yes," she said, because she understood now. She had never been unwanted. She had simply been waiting for the quiet cowboy who would see her not as leftover, not as too old or too sad, but as his. And in the wide, endless stretch of the western sky, under a sun that burned bright and certain, Lisa finally knew what it meant to be chosen.